Hello, and welcome to the Dissidents podcast, where we talk about how we can strive for a world in which freedom and reason are at the forefront of all human society. This week, we are releasing the recording of a live stream as a special bonus episode. If you missed our Liberal Values and Practice panel discussions, here's one chance to catch up on one of them. Principled Strategies for Surviving and Defeating Critical Social Justice with Helen Pluckrose. If you want to listen to more like this, check out the links in the show notes or visit ilvalues.org to find out more and join us for future live events.
Thank you, Helen, for being here. I think most people who are with us know Helen, but as a little introduction, you are the author of the best-selling book, Cynical Theories. You are, in our mind, and I think most everyone's mind, the expert on liberalism, the co-founder of Counterweight, and a little bit about this book. So we were lucky we got an early edition so that we could have this. And this is really a practical guide, and it really allows someone to recognize, first of all, to even recognize what critical social justice is, and then how to differentiate it from liberalism and liberal approaches to justice. But here's what's really interesting about it. You actually give people the tools. I mean, so many people are asking, what do I do? What do I say? What do I don't know what to say when I have this. You actually write down, well, first of all, you help people situate them where they are in a potential critical social justice environment. And then you actually navigate them through each step, depending on where they are, including actually giving people like letters and responses. And it's just, in that way, it's so amazing. I've never seen anything like that before, where people actually have that opportunity to go, oh, that's what I can do. Oh, that's what I can say. So it was really an amazing read for me. Before we get, Helen, to you, just a note for people who are here having language problems here on Circle. If you are watching and you aren't registered on Circle, you won't be able to comment, but you can still watch. And so we welcome you, though, to register on Circle so that you can be part of our conversation. This is where we can share resources, thoughts, discussions on liberalism. And for those of you who are registered and watching, we invite you to jump in with questions for Helen during the conversation. So with no further ado, Elizabeth, I turn this over to you.
So I was going to ask Helen why you wrote the book, although Jen did a great job of saying why this book is needed. But do you have any other, before I ask the next question, which is maybe a little more involved, do you have anything to add about what led you to write this book?
Yeah, well, that came from the time of running Counterweight, which you, of course, Elizabeth, know very well, and were very both helpful to and a client of. So, and it was very much about when everything went mad in the summer of 2020, and people started being asked to affirm all sorts of things they didn't believe. The trainings, it really got very intense. I was getting hundreds of emails a day, and so we filter people into a Discord server at first, and then Carrie Clark, my colleague, she started developing pathways as we put people in different groups. Pathway, what kind of information do you need, sort of practical advice. And then we had the clinic in the middle, which was people in immediate danger of disciplinary action, and then we're taking on, and we sort of developed a process for helping people deal with a critical social justice problem in their organization, from the inside, and we could see what was being effective and what wasn't. And so that's what the Counterweight Handbook is. It's a guide for how people have accurately assess the kind of problem they're having, how they've considered their own ethics and how best to express them, how they've thought in their own security, their position, what their skills, and the best way that they can push back, and then some tools to do it, as well as a very accessible guide to understanding the ideas. Now, of course, it does not invariably work. It's surprisingly often it does. When you're coming from the inside, you can effectively push back, and a lot of people have, but some people haven't. Some people have lost their jobs, or they've kept their jobs, but they're still in a very uncomfortable a situation, that the actual atmosphere hasn't changed that much. They've dodged one bullet, but it's still ongoing. So it's not a perfect way, but I think of all the ways that people can address it as an individual, that's what the Counterweight Handbook is supposed to be for. And that was a very long answer. I do this.
Well, this will probably be another longish answer. So throughout the book, you remind readers to reflect on what it means to be liberal. Could you remind us here what liberalism, how do you define liberalism, and why is it important to keep that a definition like that in mind?
So in the book, I'm using a very broad definition of liberalism, which is opposed to authoritarianism. So it's not opposed, as some people often assume, to conservatism or to radicalism, but to people trying to impose ideologies, behaviours, speech on others. So I ask people that whatever their primary framework is, perhaps they're a Christian, perhaps they're conservative, sort of cultural conservative, perhaps they're socialist, whatever their position is, be able to articulate what their objection to being asked to affirm certain things are, and do it from that very liberal perspective of everyone must be able to believe, say, and live as they see fit, provided it does no harm to anyone else nor prevents them from doing the same, and assert that right, which of course in the US is absolutely fundamental to the founding documents and the principles that the US was founded on.
You make it sound very clear and simple, and people can carry that around, I think, and repeat it fairly easily. But you do repeat it in the book, and I think it's a really good reminder throughout. That this is remember to come back to this, and then make the decision, whatever decision it is you're going to make.
Yeah, precisely. I mean, and liberals themselves, people who are really committed to much more sort of complex liberal philosophies, that will disagree on all sorts of things. But coming back to that central, do not impose your stuff on other people. Let people have the right to think, to speak, and to live in their own way, as long as it's not hurting anyone. That is the absolute core that we must protect at a minimum. That almost everything else we can argue for, as long as we still have that ability to speak, to argue, to address things.
I think that's what gets, particularly in the US, I'm not so sure in the UK, but I think that's what gets confusing, is that a lot of people assign liberalism, and you mentioned this as well, to a certain party. And so liberalism really is a foundational value, as you mentioned before, to a lot of our foundational documents. And so you can be conservative and liberal, you can be, left and liberal, right and liberal, and trying to find that common ground, I think, is so essential. And it's something that seems to over and over again confound us, at least, here in the United States.
Yeah, and I often try to say to American conservatives in particular, who are talking about wanting to preserve Western civilization, and that you really can't do that unless you are preserving those foundational principles of liberal democracies. If you get rid of those, then much of what we consider so distinguishing and what they are saying is so valuable, it just isn't there anymore. And I think people generally understand this, and it is, as you say, it's concept creep with the idea of liberalism, much more than everybody has suddenly become authoritarian and decided that they want to regress to the 15th century or something.
So, I know where my kind of origin story, getting interested in liberalism in general. And it actually, Helen, started really with you. If you'll remember, just very briefly, because this is about your book, but I, in 2018, attended a diversity training that was very illiberal, wrote a piece about it. You published in REO. And that was, to me, kind of my light bulb moment. You have been invested in looking at critical social justice for a long time. You've written cynical theories. Before that, you've written several papers on hoaxes. Do you have an origin story where you said, oh my goodness, like the world has gone crazy, the world has become illiberal? Is there a story that you have that really got you interested in studying and going further in critical social justice?
Well, I think I have always had that a strong commitment to liberal values, but it was not until I was 34, so 15 years ago, that I went to university, did undergraduate and postgraduate degrees, and at the same time that this was happening, we were starting to see the rise of what would become critical social justice. The seeds of it were there, and I was thinking of it then as postmodernism, because that was also what I was studying at university, and these ideas that knowledge is a construct of power. It's the powerful who get to tell us, who get to decide what counts as knowledge and what doesn't, and they do it in their own interests. Then that becomes legitimized, and then everybody learns to speak in these ways, and it's these ways of speaking that then perpetuate injustices. So we have to dismantle our thinking, and we have to police speech very closely. And so I was seeing this coming up in the feminist movement, first of all, because I have always been a liberal feminist, and I'm also reading it in the text that I was given to study, and the combination here. So I have traced back, looking at the theories that are coming out now and they're coming out then, tracing the citations back, and they overwhelmingly come down to Foucault. He's, and this is empirically, verifiable. He's so much more cited than anybody else. So some people often, I think that they see correctly there's a spirit of Marcuse in there. There's that critical thing which comes from the Marxist tradition. Yes, that's all in there. But if you miss the aspects of knowledge, power, and language that are unique to postmodern thought and how they've evolved, you're going to end up very likely to misunderstand the problem and be less effective at addressing it.
So before I get to my next question, I wanted to pause there, because I remember in college, Foucault, I didn't read Foucault, but I remember Foucault was being, was popular and was being read. And only because of my interest now in liberalism have I become, and because, through reading cynical theories and whatnot, I've become more familiar with these ideas of knowledge and language and power. Can you give a brief overview of what kind of Foucault's main argument is, so that we can identify it when we see it?
Well, I kind of just did, but I also need to say, for anybody who is watching this and bristling at my treatment of Foucault, he would absolutely and definitely be rolling in his grave about what critical social justice activists are doing now. He would see it quite rightly as a dominant discourse which is trying to control people's thoughts. So it's definitely a bastardization of his ideas, and others, which I won't go into. His panopticon, for example, I think is a very apt historical. But anyway, so yeah, he developed the concept of discourses, which is ways of speaking about things. How have we come to speak about certain things in certain ways? And this then attaches to knowledge, or epistemes, which are systems of knowledge that circulate in society. And these are directly interlinked with powerful constructs in society. So by deconstructing the language, the discourses that we use, we can then get at the epistemes, the sort of knowledge assumptions that are in a society, and then we can get at the powers that are abusing that. So of course, in a lot of there is a lot of truth in that. If you look at the way we've understood homosexuality in the last 200 years, for a long time it was a heinous sin that people did. Then from the end of the 19th century, it started to become a disorder that people suffered from, and then sort of by the 80s, at least, the overwhelming view was some people are gay, get over it. So these are very different discourses. So the idea that culture exists and impacts how we think is indisputable, and it is at the root of what Foucault is doing. But it's not he didn't invent that. Liberals have, and people from all kinds of philosophical thought have already noticed that culture exists, that power imbalance exists, and ways to address it and get at it. For the liberal, it is this marketplace of ideas. It is this comparing of ideas, of having of arguments. So that's the what has been taken from Foucault, this very narrow thing. We must all be thinking in ways that are white supremacist, patriarchal, imperialist, cisnormative, homonormative, ableist, etc. We can't help it. It's been socialized into us. All we can do is try to dismantle it in ourselves and watch the way that we speak so that we're not perpetuating that.
So getting back more to your book, we've got, I already mentioned how I met you, and we have Elizabeth with you, who was one of your first, would you say client would be the right word? She reached out to Counterweight. So I want to direct something to Elizabeth here for a second. Elizabeth, your story was written up by Fire as one of the most egregious violations of freedom of speech. And you went to Counterweight. You were able to call on Counterweight resources, many of which Helen puts out in her book, in the forthcoming book. And that helped you to weather the storm. But my question for you is, where are you now? And what else do you think can be done to support those who have faced similar challenges?
Yeah, so I think that from the beginning, the assumption is that this is going to get better. Like from the instant it happened, you just think, well, if I just explain to people that this was a research study, participants, got an orientation to research, signed up for a research platform, chose a research study, read a consent document, answered survey questions, one of which was, included Black Lives Matter. We asked a question about a movement. It was not personal. This is typical research, that the best way to examine human behavior is it within the safety of a research study. So even if you ask a question that's, possibly offensive to some people, this is very common commonly done in research, and people have been doing it for, years, a decade, or a century or more. I just kept thinking people would get that, would understand it. And, a week or so went by, and, luckily Helen replied, no, you are in code red. So I emailed and said, there was an all campus email calling my students and me white supremacists. And I'm very confused because we were doing social justice research in pursuit of, my university, like so many, have social justice, goals, and have been putting out, grants, special grants. We had a special grant for social justice, all those kinds of things. This is obviously a mission, part of the mission of the university. And I'm like, I'm very confused. I thought I was doing a good thing. And luckily, Helen responded with, you're in code red. And we met, I think, that very day, even though we're at, the huge time difference. And I just want to say about the book, I was unprepared, and I think everyone is unprepared for tragedy, no matter what kind of tragedy it is, until it happens. And I'm not saying that this book would have circumvented, anything that has happened. However, I would say don't wait to buy the book until tragedy befalls you. Have this book, in your electronic or your, physical bookshelf. And skim, if you don't have to read it thorough. There's material in there that is about critical social justice, that's about liberalism. You don't have to know how to deal with something illiberal just yet. Know that it's there. Skim through that part. Read the first part. Skim through the strategies. Just know that it's there. That it's there for you when you come across something. And so it's been a little over 3 years now for me. And it's, I pushed back hard it was necessary, I thought, to preserve academic freedom at my institution, but also I was worried about, I was the institutional review board chair, so I was an ethical review chairperson for 11 years of an ethical review board on campus, which is typical. Universities have them, all universities have them. And we actually don't report to the university. Institutional review boards follow federal guidelines. And so, but my university, threatened to shut down the entire institutional review board without really understanding what that would mean beyond check, social justice, check. They weren't really thinking about the long-term consequences. And so that was circumvented, but, people need to know, and Helen makes this really clear in the book, and she made it really clear with me when I decided to push back hard, that there will be consequences. There are consequences to every choice you make, whether you decide to be sort of quietly, acquiesce in public, but privately kind of, stick to your own values and maybe talk to other people who are concerned, or whether you go, all the way like I did, going to fire and taking on the union and taking on, the entire state university system while they were in contract talks. So, these things don't go away. People have memories. They know that, they know my name, and they know good things about me for 11 years with the IRB. They also know, that maybe I was caught up in a scandal, and maybe I caused some of that scandal myself in their view. So it's scary. Sometimes you're not sure where you stand with people, even people that you think there's an uncertainty. And I think that there's, and I think that Helen does describe this in the book, because she has traveled this journey with so many people, that it is a journey, that you go into it. When these things happen, you think, again, well, I'll just, if I explain it right, they'll understand. But these are not people who are motivated to understand from your perspective. They're motivated to understand from a different perspective, and that's likely not going to happen. So you have to make new friends, and you have to, you have to change course a little bit, and make some choices along the way. You can't know how it's going to turn out, whether you end up staying at your job or moving on. It could be a great opportunity, as it has been for some people, a great opportunity to do new and different things. But I would really encourage people to, if you're at all, if you know anybody who works, goes to school, works or goes to school, you should really have this book and skim through it. Even if you don't think that you're going to have something in particular to address. So I've grown a lot through this. I mean, Helen, it's like now, so it's like 3 years plus for me, more like 4.5, 5 for you, that you've been doing this kind of thing. I don't know, like how would you say that your, perspective or understanding of this has developed over time? Where are you personally now, as you look at the journeys of the people that you've traveled with, and may travel with even vicariously through this book in the future?
Yeah, I think I've certainly got a great deal more experience, the practical experience, and I've developed my ideas and approaches into more detail. But my perspective on things hasn't changed significantly, because I keep seeing those same patterns. That pattern that happens with Elizabeth, a rigorous a scientist, dedicated to social justice, following her work in its way, and thinking this is an error. I will explain reasonably what is happening here, and they will understand. It's precisely the same pattern that happened to a working class firefighter in London. He knew He was very committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion in that real sense, of being inclusive of diverse people and ideas. And the same pattern happened to him, and he too thought, well, what have they misunderstood here? I'll go and I'll show them what I've done to make sure everybody feels included. And so yeah, just seeing that pattern, and it really is such a simple one. It just appear in so many places, and with people with so many different ideas. I've got more granular, more informed, but I've become more convinced of the very simplistic nature of the problem, and of course I've been engaging with the ways in which people are trying to push back at the problem, some of which I think are misunderstandings, and some are misguided, some aren't thinking in the long term, and some are straightforwardly reactionary. So trying to counter those as well, and people don't do this both sidism. Well, I'm afraid there are lots of sides, there are lots of authoritarianisms, and when you're opposing any one of them, you have to do so in ways which thinks long term and does not allow others to come and take its place, because then you'll just end up having to affirm other beliefs that you don't have, and deny other beliefs that you do have, and the pendulum will just swing.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I noticed was that the university created a story, and they were very invested in telling that story, and there were more of them than there were of me. And this is not illegal. It's like there was no legal case. I don't get my day in court, you know. It's just one person telling a story versus multiple people who are much more invested, you know, financially and such in the story. So again, you know, I would say that the book does a good job of reminding people that this is going to be, you know, a journey, and don't make quick decisions. I mean, obviously you have to make some quick decisions, because if you let your institution's story take hold, you know, too strongly, then you know, it's a tougher, more of an uphill battle. But it is worthwhile to take your time and really think about it as the book lays out. So Jen, you read the book too. What would you say in terms of, like, if you had this book in 2018, do you think it would have, you know, would have made a difference? And, you know, having read it now, how does it frame, you know, your thinking going forward?
Yeah, I think it would. First of all, it just gives you, I think what's most helpful is it just situates you in a time and place, right? So it gives you the language. Again, even when I went to this diversity training, I didn't have the language around critical social justice. I didn't know it. I knew something felt wrong, but I didn't know what I was listening to. And so I think this is one of the things that is so important, is this book is great because it actually, you know, gives you tools, but so many people don't even know what they're hearing. I mean, they just know it feels a little off. And so having this both to tell me what to do, but also what I was feeling and why I was feeling, you know, a little bit off, would have been wonderful. I mean, this was 2018 for me. And so this was about the same time, I think, that Counterweight was starting. This was about the same. So this was about the same stuff that I think everything was kind of coming into the whole atmosphere, and everyone was confused. I feel that there is some clarity now, thanks to Helen's work with cynical theories, with Counterweight, around what we're looking at when we talk about critical social justice versus liberalism. But I think it's still something that's really missing in the dialogue, and just being able to identify the differences and identify that, because I think, Helen, you use this word, it's kind of like it's like an idea creep, right? It's creep. So, I mean, it's kind of slowly moved into the place where now some of the language around critical social justice just seems like the norm. And so that's where a lot of people, if you're not paying attention, it just, and you mentioned this in the book, and you mentioned, I mean, who could say there's anything wrong with diversity, right? I mean, that is, and we all want diversity. There is justice in, you know, diversity, but it's using the language and being able to interpret that, I think, is one of the most difficult hurdles for people who are unfamiliar with what they're facing. So this is where the book would have been incredibly useful for me. I remember, Helen, just very quickly, I remember sitting at this diversity training and someone said, and you write this in your book, but someone wrote me a note. I was asking questions because I wanted to know. I was so curious. And this woman sitting next to me wrote me a note because she didn't want to say it out loud and said, basically, do your work. And you write about that in your book. And I'm like, I'm here. I'm doing my work. I'm trying to learn. But it was like that kind of just shutting you down that I was like, well, why would you tell me? Isn't this the work? And so again, I think I kind of went off on several tangents there, but that it would have helped me at that time. I was wholly unfamiliar at that time.
But there are, I think you've captured the aspect of the idea of discourses that is true as culture changes, as ways of speaking about things change, they start to feel more normal. Things that would have seemed reasonable and ethical, such as colorblindness. And the principle that we do not evaluate people by their race is suddenly very it's akin to a commitment to not ever noticing racism, and things have just you find your own speech changing, you find your own interpretations changing, and this is why I think that so often these theories they get a kernel of truth right, and then they go at it the wrong way, because the right way, I would argue, obviously because I'm a liberal, to get at this thing, this kind of creep, these it's kind of oppressive language coming down, the self-censorship, is to keep all of those ideas out there and to really push for that, because as soon as somebody comes up and raises this thing, is it a microaggression to compliment a black woman on her hairstyle, or better to compliment her eloquence at her? Well, okay, give that a bit of thought. You've raised an interesting point. Was there an assumption that because she was black she wouldn't speak eloquently, or was this just a compliment? How should we think about it and engage with it, these ideas, because there's going to be some good insights in there. But if we're that's right, never say something like that again because you must be thinking this, that's where we go wrong, because that's keeping those ideas in, having them there's many discourses as possible in society, and it really does, it affects our ability to think. When your ways of thinking get narrowed, then you're quite trapped, and people find it very difficult to speak and explain what's happening. So let's keep all those ways of speaking open.
So Helen, I've got a surprise guest for you that I'm going to bring into the room here in just a second. So let's see if our participant, I don't know, there we go. So I want to introduce Mike Burke to the room. Hey, Mike. So for when you pick up Helen's book, you'll see that Mike and Elizabeth were both, kind of the academic arm of Counterweight. So Mike, welcome into the show. And Mike talks a lot about, there's a new trend, and I wanted him to really address this with you, of woke authoritarianism and anti-woke authoritarianism. Mike, what are your thoughts on that? What do you see as the transition, this anti-woke authoritarianism?
Oh, we can't hear you.
Surprise, guys.
While Mike is sorting out his audio, I was just thinking, Mike has always been particularly useful to me, because I as a liberal left and Mike as a liberal conservative, we've both got that liberalism going on there, and so we can kind of act as a foil for each other, because I can obviously get biased towards the left, he could get biased towards more conservative ideas, but because we have that strong streak in the middle, and when we're sort of working together, this is incredibly productive, and it's what I was talking about the value of having different ideas in there. Have you sorted your Sound out nice?
I hope so. It just defaulted to a microphone that is in my headphones that doesn't exist because I pulled it out and I used the proper microphone. But anyway, you know, these things happen. Yeah, to pick up on your point and then to pivot back to what Jen asked me, Burke, who, as you know, is my favorite philosopher, not me, the Burke, but Edmund Burke, you know, who was you know, the founding father of conservatism, but actually a liberal, a Whig parliamentarian who was quite progressive for his day in terms of being for American independence and also in favor of abolishing the slave trade, made the point that you actually need both parties. Because one will always capture one side of reality and the other will capture another side of the reality. Because they're focused on different things. And Elizabeth and I were having a conversation a few days ago in which we went over a paper that Elizabeth found that really made that point that, you know, broadly speaking, and I think you said something similar on Twitter recently too, that broadly speaking, the left tends to focus on the distribution of resources, whereas the right tends to focus on the accumulation of resources. And they're both really important tasks. And in a society, you need people who are focused on different things. And those people are going to be different based on their ideological makeup or cultural makeup as well. So I think that's really important. In terms of what I'm seeing and what I have seen, I've been made the victim of woke mobs and rather like you, Helen, fortunately, I did a great deal of reading up on them before they came for me. So I was kind of able to set little traps for them and that kind of thing. And that worked quite well, although, you know, it did take an immense kind of psychological toll on me regardless, because just having people, you know, even if you've defeated them in arguments and made them look a bit silly, having hordes of people around you that absolutely hate you is never a pleasant thing for anybody to go through. So what I've been noticing at the moment is woke on the right. And I really mean woke because, you know, they tend to call it something different. They call it being red pilled, you know, from the Matrix. You know, you can choose this pill or choose this pill. If you choose this pill, you go back to your life. But if you choose this pill, you suddenly become aware of reality. And that's exactly what the woke originally was saying, weren't they? Like you wake up to reality, that we are aware of the ways in which discrimination and power travels and this kind of pseudo Foucauldian. I think it's a misreading of Foucault that goes back to Rorty, but anyway, I think you agree with that, right? Yeah, and what I've noticed, I've noticed like a certain pattern of behavior that is really concerning me, and like you, it concerns me with particular regards to LGBT people. So what I notice is that they will find some nutcase on TikTok. And by the way, I don't think it's any coincidence that TikTok is a Chinese Communist Party platform. I know that might sound conspiratorial, but if you really look into it, it's not. Who is behaving in an extremely bizarre way, either bizarre or in a way that potentially, you know, pretty much everybody in their right mind would fully agree is completely inappropriate around children. And then they'll point that out and they'll say, this person is behaving in a bizarre way. Well, okay, everybody agrees, left, right, center, whatever. This is inappropriate around children, also agree. And then therefore the leap that follows is, therefore this person is the authentic voice of the LGBT community, even though no such thing exists, obviously, in various community. And there is a conspiracy of gay people. I mean, I had one person tell me that it was cooked up at the UN level, and Elizabeth and I obviously did a deep dive into that and went through all the UN documents and found absolutely nothing. And the gay people are trying to corrupt the kids. And I'm seeing this kind of rhetoric spreading. And it very much reminds me of the kind of woke stuff that up until recently I was spending more time resisting. And now I think I find myself resisting the stuff on the right a bit more. And I worry that it's even more dangerous than left-wing wokery, which isn't to take away from the dangers of left-wing wokery at all. You know, there may have been a few Pyrrhic victories here and there. Perhaps there's been a slight decrease in their power, but they're still, you know, they're still plenty powerful enough to ruin your career, right? So, I mean, they need resisting. But what I'm seeing with these people, that the wokey lot, they haven't taken over the Democrat Party in the United States. You know, they might have undue influence. Politicians in the Democrat Party might be playing to them too much. I would agree with that. But the MAGA lot who are, or the Ron DeSantis lot who are kind of basically the same thing now that he's dropped out of the race, really do seem to have taken over the Republican Party in the United States. So might pose a threat, and this is the huge thing that's worrying me. And I think that you, hopefully, because you're so good at this, but we as well, really need to be focusing on that threat now. I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
I think, yeah, I mean, this has been looked at in a lot of different ways. Matt McManus looked specifically at the rise of what he calls the rise of the postmodern right,
yeah,
and it you know, the post-truth narrative with postmodern narratives, sort of different ways of knowing alternative facts. This is a and what Elizabeth was saying, and what so many of us experienced is the spinning of these narratives. That really the truth of the matter doesn't matter so much anymore. We now have a nice, neat narrative of Elizabeth Spivak, the white supremacist, for God's sake, and Mike Burke, the homophobe.
The homophobe, yeah, that was my one, yeah.
And it doesn't matter that this does not connect to reality, because we're talking now in tokens, in battles between good and evil. And as Mike was saying, we see these as well on the grounds of race, because the critical social justice activists have so closely tied in their theories of race with Black people that now people who are probably already inclined to be racist can actually bash black just a black guy skiing, attempting a difficult stunt and not making it. Suddenly there was a diversity on the slopes, and the thing was, you know, a black guy shouldn't be there, and he's generally incompetent, and it was this impression now of anti-woke, that you are being anti-woke, you are criticizing critical social justice by having a go at a black guy attempting stunts, or as Mike said, you know, you get a picture of somebody who is behaving badly, and then they are suddenly the authentic voice of a certain group. Now, for some subsets, there'll be a black guy committing a violent crime, and that's Black people. For other people, Black people are defined by Ibram X. Kendi, and it's we're narrowing in now to very simplistic narratives, and that is something. When Elizabeth, earlier, when you said how has my thinking changed over the last few years, this is what I'm seeing. I'm seeing a lot less people aren't apologetic now about forming their narrative. There used to be an aim, at least, to appear unbiased, but as we see on social media now, an event happens and people immediately weigh in with their own narrative about what happened here before any of the facts are in, because if they are proven wrong, it's not going to damage them reputationally, because what was important was speaking into the right narrative rather than trying to find out what's true. And that's the thing that I've seen escalate, and that is, as Mike says, it's because it's coming from the anti-woke right as well as the left, that there isn't a pushback, a significant enough pushback on making facile narratives just to do war with each other.
Can I ask you a question related to that? Because I think this is something that you're kind of uniquely placed to answer. You know, as somebody on the left, and you know, me on the kind of the philosophical right rather than the kind of economic right or anything like that, you know, you must have gone through that horrible sense of feeling dirty because you're feeling unwashed or whatever, or feeling contaminated. I mean, that's how I felt, because you failed those purity checks on the left. And then obviously you kind of move into a piece of equilibrium because you find common ground with people who have also failed those purity checks and are very good at articulating all of the problems on the left and remain so. But then who because they feel isolated, find common group with Christian conservatives, for example. That's fine. I've got Christian conservative friends who kind of steer them in a different direction. And then again, somebody like you then would fail the purity checks of the right. How do you cope with that? Because I found that very difficult.
It is. I mean, I think that pressure to slide, which is such, and Elizabeth will correct me. I'm going wrong here because I'm about to talk about social psychology. But this I know. this thing that we seem to have as social mammals, where we so badly want to agree with the people who are kind to us, who are supportive to us. So it isn't even, as a lot of people say, a cynical form of audience capture. I'll give you more of what you want, so you give me more money. It is a being drawn into a narrative of wanting to agree and wanting to be on the same page, or wanting to have a place that is so very difficult to resist, or even often to be aware that you're doing that. And I think I am very, very fortunate, much more than both of you and all of the Counterweight clients, in that I don't I'm not employed by anybody. I write for a living. There isn't, my tribe are the people who have the same ideas as me, and in the broadest thing. So the people I respect me, and that's much less of a left versus right thing. I can stay. I have less pressure than a lot of people to slide one way or the other. But of course, I do. As you were saying, when the left was behaving so badly, I actually and still is, I actually became more strongly left because I wanted to assert the correct sort of liberal left way of doing things. Now that I'm addressing a very similar pattern of a liberalism on the right, I find myself defending more conservative values of saying that no, this is not how an ethical conservative behaves. This is not how we conserve what is good in culture. You are doing it wrong.
I do think that the book, you do a good job of that in the book, really helping people to assert what's best about their position. Look, I was here to do work on social justice, and really helping people to frame that argument to to avoid arguing, but to actually just use some words that say, that sort of challenge people. I think that that people are not as aware as they should be of their own hypocrisies, and they should gently be reminded of them. And I do think that could that those kinds of things that you have in the book could help. And I also think that some of what what you and Mike are talking about here, and whether it's left and right or black and white or whatever, is something that you also cover in the book, which is about cultural competency and the difference between being an ally for the woke or whatever sort of terms, versus having cultural competency. So I wonder if you could sort of like segue back into sort of relate that cultural competency to what you and Mike have been talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is, I just sort of picked on that concept because cultural competency was something that used to be it's kind of got squashed out by critical social justice now, but it is in a situation where you're going to work with a diverse range of people. Then you learn about different cultures, different beliefs. In my case, because I was a carer, I learned about different kinds of formal manners and etiquette with different groups. I learned how to prepare halal or kosher food for somebody, an elderly person with dementia who wasn't able to do it for themselves. It's very practical learning what other people believe and what is important to them without any expectation to take it on yourself. And this is what I think that we are lacking at the moment, and it's what's preventing genuine inclusion and diversity, because so many people, a lot of the employers particularly who speak to me about their employees who are causing them trouble, they're not actually bad people a lot of the time. They don't have other ideas. You know, we had one young woman who did not realize that putting out Black Lives Matter slogans was a political statement, because the policies said that they value people equally, and obviously that means Black Lives Matter. So trying to show her that, and you know, somebody not realizing that just insisting that everybody state their pronouns doesn't include the views of people who don't believe in gender identity, don't think they have one, have a conscientious objection to it. So there are a lot of people who know very well that other ideas exist and they're determined to stamp them out, but there are also people who just have not thought about them. They don't have an understanding, or they don't have a real understanding. So I feel that if we, you know, if we beat woke, and there are some positive signs that its cultural strength is diminishing in the US, the UK, not in Canada, unfortunately. But if we do win that, then we're going to have to catch a lot of the people who have been failed by universities and then been stuck in a bubble. So having this kind of thing, so you don't have to believe any of these ideas. Know that these people exist. Know that have a real understanding of what a cultural conservative believes, what an economic conservative believes, what a gender critical feminist believes, and then you've got some responsibility when working in a diverse workplace, not to accede to any of them, but to know they exist and factor them in when you're talking about things. Because I just the polarization and the misunderstanding, most of which I believe is absolutely genuine, is a problem.
I
You know, that's really.
I was just going to say, to give you an example of that, I was trying to teach a class on conservatism at my university, and I was trying to find articles that would give. I couldn't find any. You know, a robust steel man and then a criticism, right? So here is conservatism, here is the point that it makes, and then to segue into a criticism. I couldn't find any. I could find pro-conservative stuff, like from Scruton and people like that. And I could find lots of anti-conservative stuff, but I couldn't find a genuine left-wing author who was saying, okay, I don't like something that McManus could do, or you have done, who could say, look, I don't agree with this. This is not where I am. But here is the point that they're making, and here's why it's important, and here's why they have a point. I couldn't find anybody doing that. And I can't find very many people on the left doing that to the right either. It's as if, you know, we've got to this situation where we're not trying to understand each other. It's the person with whom I disagree is either stupid, deluded, or evil. And it's very, very worrying, because that then prevents the kind of diversity that we really want. You know, having diversity of ethnicities and races and sexual orientations and all that, that's great. I mean, it's positive because it shows the tolerance towards those people, but it's not nearly as valuable as the kind of intellectual diversity that allowed those trends to happen in the first place, right? The intellectual diversity that allowed people to challenge, for example, the notion that homosexuality should remain illegal and people like Alan Turing should be punished. Do you know what I mean?
So I love this idea of cultural competency. I mean, before even getting into this world and with ILB, I mean, that's the work that I did. I lived overseas. I worked overseas. I even started an organization once called American Cultural Consultants, with the idea that if you're coming to America and you're trying to make a life, here's some practical tips on how, you know, in general, a lot of people respond to certain things. And so that was where I went into the DEI training, kind of with that cultural competency mindset. And that's where I got so confused, because there was a lot of respect there for other cultures. I mean, I again, growing up in other cultures, that was been my life, is understanding and learning, and my passion. And so I just feel that so many times people say, let's ban DEI. We're hearing this now in the United States. Like you said, there is some pushback, ban DEI, you know, dismantle some of the faculty and DEI faculty, but it's be replaced with what? So again, there's these kernels of truth that were the origin of DEI that were just kind of taken in the wrong way. And I think that boils down to cultural competency. And I wonder if that's something, I mean, if there, I don't even know, do we need to check a box? But if we need to check a box, if cultural competency could be that box.
Yeah, I would. I would say so, because I think some people, if I were to anticipate the objection, it would be something like, a trans person shouldn't have to study the views of people who don't believe in gender identity, who don't believe in that thing that's very central to who they are, or and any other group that can be assumed, often wrongly, to hold a certain kind of view. What right do we have to actually get people to understand other ideas correctly? And I say that is a genuine sort of concern. But when if you are going to be in a position where you're working with a wide range of people, some basic sort of training in the different ideas that are out there, without you can think this is completely wrong, and your right to say so will be absolutely respected, that these ideas are out there. But it's to try and catch the people who are making, sort of imposing their views on other people. There's a big benefit of the doubt that needs to go here. Okay, so you have repeatedly imposed your views on this other person. This is causing a problem at work. Please take this court, learn how that other ideas exist, because you have this plausible deniability. I didn't know that would be defense. I didn't think that was divisive. Okay, well, read this, work on that, and then you will. And then we've got that benefit of the people, young people who genuinely don't have an understanding of other ideas that exist. This can start to make up for that. And people who know very well that they do, but are feigning ignorance in order to push things on people, said, well, no, you can't. You knew that these other perfectly legal views exist in society, and that this company protects the right to have that view, and you continue to try and impose your own anyway. So it is now reasonable to take disciplinary action.
I do think that the book does a good job. I think you're not a psychologist, but you do, you've certainly, throughout this, you've certainly studied human nature. And I think you do a good job of balancing, pushback and skill, like learn some skills here, whether that's cultural competency or whether that's how to, learn some of the language of critical social justice, that kind of thing, but also a level of forgiveness, forgiveness for the humanity of people who are, who are very flawed, and who often also think, as Mike pointed out, also think that, and may genuinely be doing some of the right things, right? Even some of them for the right reasons, and there's, so giving, allowing for that level of forgiveness and openness to a conversation, for the person who reads the book, I think that they also would get that. It's like you push, yes, if you're ready and you've thought this through, then, here's some ways to push back. And here's also ways to really genuinely consider the perspectives of the other people in the situation and in the organization, who maybe are bystanders. I mean, I know I'm very angry with the people who have just stood by and not, participated. But I think reading the book, it gave me, I don't want to say like sympathy exactly, because I'm still mad, but I do think that it helps to see those perspectives, and there is a level of forgiveness, I think, that you can't afford people in moving and trying to move forward. I don't want to trample on the last couple of minutes here, so Jen.
Well, I think, one of our questions where we're seeing change, you say, and you remind readers that critical social justice advocates have enjoyed a privilege of their own that will not be easy to relinquish. So what do you think about that? Are we in for more struggles around social justice? Does it become a power play? What does that look like to you? What are you seeing?
I think while, again, so speaking of the US and the UK, and the UK particularly, that we are seeing a diminishment. We are seeing people more able to push back on a sort of societal level. We're seeing less of the language in sort of company speak and in news media speak, that they're now addressing different. So we can have this optimism that it is that there is a decline, but filtering through to all the institutions which have made certain pledges, and the way things that the way systems work is not going to happen immediately, of course. So we saw that the rise. A lot of people put it from about 2013 to hitting the peak in 2020. I put it at 2010 because this is when the ideas really started coming into the academia. So we're potentially, if that's the peak, then we're going to have years anyway. So we're going to see, and it will probably take longer because it is embedded in the institutions that are trying to unravel. A lot of that isn't going to be, as Elizabeth often reminds me, as simple as saying, let's just reform that and get these other things in there. There are systems in place. And we also might see an upsurge of authoritarianism, as we often do. When something is dying, we get a kind of death throes. And then we see a real sort of pockets of extreme authoritarianism that make people think, God, that this problem is just getting worse and worse. And maybe it isn't. In this particular place, yes, that was a severe problem. The individuals affected by that are severely affected, but on a social level, we might be doing better. I think we are, but let's not get complacent, and let's try and see it out the right way.
Here.
Elizabeth, last question. Well, I've got a very important last question, but if you or Mike have a question, I'll go first. I'll let y'all go.
You should.
No, mine is not directly related to the book.
Okay. So. Well, I guess I would
be careful with that question.
Yeah,
I know what your question is, by the way, Jen.
Would ask you, Helen. What do you want? Like, if people are just about to leave because we're right on the deadline here, what do you want? What do you wish we'd asked? What do you want people to know about this book? Why should what have we missed in this conversation?
I don't think you've missed a lot. I would say, of course, there are limitations on this book. We're looking at a very specific, individualized, bottom-up approach in which I'm trying to get larger numbers of people who may not be in a powerful position to understand things and grow a groundswell. So what I don't cover in the book is the action that are happening to reform institutions from the top down, protections that are being considered in law for freedom of belief and speech, and of course the sort of case laws that are going to happen. So there's a lot more. That this is really very, very much okay, so you're in this position, what can you as an individual do? But there's a lot more that people could do. I think having this kind of knowledge and this mindset is very important. And I also support and have a lot of respect for people ethically taking different approaches on an institutional or legal or constitutional level.
So Helen, as a Texan, we do tea a certain way. We do tea a certain way. And I'm just wondering if you think your ideas on tea are slightly authoritarian.
Yes, I do. I am. When I become Empress of the world, then I will impose a strict protocol. People will have to demonstrate their ability to know how to make tea, how not to make tea. A first offence would probably only be 6 months in the gulag, but for a second one, then it might have to be kind of I think life really, because the corruption being spread here is just too dangerous. And obviously, I'm joking.
So to be clear, you're approaching this from a consequentialist paradigm, not a deontological one.
All of the paradigms, any paradigm that works to stop people like Dr. Spivak putting tea in microwaves and Texans from putting ice in it.
I put fake sweetener in too.
Me too.
That's actually acceptable if you made it right in the first place.
Oh, okay.
Which you didn't, so we're not at that point. And
milk has to go in first, right? Then the tea bag, and then water.
What was that, Mike?
Milk first, right, Helen?
No,
would you put milk first, and then the tea bag, and then the water?
Make me disown you as well.
But then you get a layer of fat that forms upon the top if you don't do that.
No, Michael. No.
Oh shit!
For God's sake, this has been an argument going on.
And on that note,
do not listen to the milk firsters just because they seem that seem to be British and they seem to know the ways of tea and they seem to have had standards. When they suggest that you put the milk in first and you let the tea bag touch it, remove them from your life, shun them. Try to get them fired if possible.
Randy in the comments is saying, "Be careful, we'll organise another tea party here in the US." Well, Randy, I have something to say to you on that. I agree with you. By the way, the Boston Tea Party lot, they protested that their rights were being denied to them, their rights as Englishmen. And they were English, and the US Constitution was written by English people for English people. So you, Randy, are English, even though you don't know
it. I'm putting Randy's name down in my book of people to be investigated when I am Empress of the world. I do not wish to hear anything.
No. Randy's a good chap. You'd like Randy quite a lot.
You will have to write a book, an authoritative guide on tea, because we don't know what rules to follow if we don't have a handbook. So I expect that.
You're not English. You're not English, so you don't realise.
That's why I need a handbook.
George Orwell, I'll ask you to put under this George Orwell's guide to making tea, because it was the definitive. Nobody has ever done better than that. So and he of course does speak about why the milk firsters are entirely wrong and also amoral.
How about salt?
You're dead to me.
Okay, before we get to thank you everyone for joining us for this panel discussion. Helen, thank you so much. Your book comes out in June from Pitchstone Publishing. It can be found on Amazon and in all of your bookstores, the Counterweight Handbook. And you can find us at ilvalues.org or here on Circle, where we host most of our discussions and conversations. So thank you again, Helen.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike Elizabeth.
Arigato.